Understood. Great. Welcome everyone for today's webinar. Behavioral pricing is on the agenda today. A very interesting topic. We're going to look at some of the effects. Going to put some light on those mystical parts and take a look on how we put them in action. Before we go in, quick introduction on the speaker today. So it's going to be Ingo Reinhardt, founder and managing director of Buynomics. He spent a large part of his last 15 years, 14 years in pricing and RGM, has seen a lot of the challenges in the field and developed, based on those insights, the Buynomics method, the virtual shopper technology. It's the engine of our SaaS solution. Come to that in a second. Myself, I'm Anton. I'm the moderator today. I'm leading the product development at Buynomics, and have for the last couple of years worked very directly with our clients together, helping them putting their challenges on the table and finding answers to those. And very excited to be here today. Before we get started with the topic, for those who don't know us yet, we're Buynomics. We're a software provider for holistic commercial optimization. This includes pricing, it includes promotional optimization, but also topics like which products to offer, what's the distribution, how do I set my conditions with my customers, my retailers. And I would say there's a couple of very clear USPs we're bringing to the table. Just to touch on those, but I think it's worth mentioning. For most, commercial questions are answered in a holistic approach. And we do that by leveraging a single source of truth. What that means is dependencies, interactions between those different levers, pricing, promotion, products, they're fully considered, and they need to be accurate. And this is, you see it here in the second bullet, very high predictive accuracy, ultimately leading to quicker results and most importantly, better results. So there's plenty of cases with our clients where we see a profitability uplift. Happy to share those. So if you're interested to learn a bit more, please feel free to reach out for informal chat. And we can see how we can maybe help you as well. Now, I'm very interested, looking forward to what we're going to talk about. I will be available for the chat in the meantime, so feel free to ask any questions in there. We're going to answer them throughout the webinar, and also have a part at the end to come to Q&A. And with that, I would say, Ingo, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Anton, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for taking the time to join our webinar. I think we have something really interesting and important to say for our field, pricing, revenue management, and also have something, let's say, up to date. So should be interesting for people who are new to the field, new to our webinar, and also those who have seen our webinars in the past. So behavioral pricing, why do we need to deal with it? And I think it's because it's relevant. So whenever we make decisions, we can't really deny that we're humans and the way we function. And I think this is like a standard example that I'm showing you, that even if you know that what you're seeing isn't really true, it's really hard not to see it this way. So here with the simple example, if you look at the two arrows, one of them has the tops facing outwards, the other.
Ingo, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think it kicked me out.
No, now you're back. I would suggest maybe to turn off the video just to make sure we have the voiceover.
Yeah, sorry everyone. I don't know why this happened. So we were just talking about the importance of behavioral effects and pricing and revenue management. And when we talk about that, here's, I think, what we mean. And why is it important for pricing? So whenever we use tools, and I think the most prominent one are price elasticities that are essentially founded in microeconomics, we sort of, or implicitly or explicitly assume that actors, people are rational in their decision making. So rational means that people are optimizing or maximizing their utility they will only buy a product if it maximizes their utility. If you show someone a portfolio of different products, then the person will always choose the one that maximizes his or her utility, regardless of whether you show them 2 or 3 products or 100 or 10,000. They will always be able to maximize utility. This is essentially the implicit assumption. People are also consistent. If they prefer product A over product B and B over C, then they should also prefer A over C. So there are lots of properties that are required for rationality. But when we look at our own decision making with the error example on the previous page, or with something like the 9.99 versus 10 euro, we know that we're actually not very rational in many decisions, and that counts for us, and of course that counts for everyone, particularly people who buy our products. So therefore, it makes a lot of sense to try to understand how that works and how that impacts people's buying decisions, and how that then in the end also affects the quality of our pricing and RGM decisions. All right, so what's the state of the literature here, essentially? I would say there is a very, very broad literature on the field. So probably most of you have seen some of these books. There are tons of books on behavioral economics, on behavioral pricing. Things like the substitution effect or the anchoring effect that play a role are discussed in many of these books. And it seems to me that there's essentially, if you read long books like Think Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, for example, there's just an endless list of different effects that have been studied in the field and that have some importance. What I would say kind of somewhat missing is like a coherent understanding of the different effects and how to make them useful, and particularly for us in pricing, how to make best use of different pricing effects that go beyond just having like some pricing algorithm that in the end comes to a conclusion. The optimal price based on price elasticities is, for example, 10.37, and instead of 10.37, we go for 9.99 to stay below the price threshold. So these are the topics, lots of different effects, and the question is, how do we make them useful? And I think there's another layer that has become somewhat relevant in the past. And if you've seen, I would say over this summer, I think 2 months ago or 3 months ago, when it started in June, there was a rather famous scandal involved where a Harvard professor of behavioral psychology was sort of exposed for some fraud in papers, and essentially she was you could see in her papers that she manipulated results, and that's something that sort of is a problem for the field. If many of the effects that are being discussed, like the anchoring effect or the substitution effect, don't really hold true if you try to work with them. And it seems to me that particularly the effects that are more difficult to believe or are a bit farther away from direct are the ones that are a bit more difficult. So, for example, she had in a paper the following effect. She made students argue against their belief. So, for example, if you support a soccer team, so my soccer team here in Germany is SFC Köln, and I have to argue that another club that I maybe typically not like that much, have to argue that other club is better than my club, then, and that was the thesis of the paper, people feel dirty and they're more likely to then afterwards buy cleansing products. If you think about the hypothesis, that feels is very interesting if that was true, but it feels very unlikely. And in effect, the positive result, the paper was published in a leading journal in the field, and the effect that was reported essentially came from the fact that she manipulated the data to come out with the effect that, yes, people actually, if you make them argue against their beliefs, they do feel dirty and they're more likely to buy cleansing products. And this effect essentially couldn't then also afterwards be replicated by similar studies. And the same has been true, probably one of the more famous example. We have all the sources here in the footnotes, and when we share the presentation next week, you can take a look for yourself. That even in the Kahneman book, Thinking Fast and Slow, many of the effects that were reported couldn't really be replicated afterwards. So particularly the ones that are, I would say, farther away from obvious. So things like when you write on a page something like, there was a specific example, bananas and vomit, people were less likely to buy bananas afterwards. So these effects that are very indirect are often really not true. And that is for us in pricing really important when we try to work with these effects. I think one of the message here is that it's always important to validate the results that, for example, we get from literature with our own research. So here, this just as a primer. And now let's look at a very specific example. And I think one that many know, and we just want to use that as an example of how to actually work with behavioral pricing effects. And I think this one's validated many times. So this one's one of the more solid ones and not one of those who are difficult to replicate. So the case is you have your selling wine and you have two different wine types, A and B. You have a cheaper one, a more expensive one. For the typical customer, it's really difficult to judge which to take. And in those situations, most people tend to go for the cheaper one because they have sort of risk aversion, different things, why they don't want to buy the more expensive one here at 30 euros. And in this example, 60% bought the cheaper wine and 40% bought the more expensive wine. If then a decoy, even more expensive wine is introduced to the set, then the behavioral effect essentially is that the bottle that previously was expensive now looks quite reasonable at 30 euros. And what then happens is that from previously 60-40%, the new sales shares in this example were 36 for the cheapest bottle, 59 for the middle bottle, and 5 for the decoy. So the decoy is extremely expensive. But what it has done, it has moved some customers or some buyers from bottle A to bottle B, because in effect, the middle bottle has gained market share from 40% to 59%. And that's something that wouldn't happen with rational people. And that's something that's one of these behavioral effects that work, that you have a decoy product. And we see this in many cases when we have, for example, good, better, best portfolio. Often the best product only serves to make the better product in the middle look more reasonable. And this is the one that's actually people want to sell in this case. So what's going on in this case here? We clearly see, because the middle bottle gained, that's irrational behavior. But to understand really what the effect of this irrational behavior is, we need to take a deeper look here. So on the right side, again, we have Homo sapiens. That's what we all are. A little bit irrational, and we have the 36%, 59%, and 5%. The question now is, what would rational people do in this case? And rational people, they essentially maximize their utility, and we're able, from other experiments, for example, to understand the quality of the wines and are able to associate quality with utility. And if you would show that to this Homo economicus, who's rational in his decision making, you would get something like this. So the share of bottle A goes from 60 to 55, so it loses 5 percentage points that now go to bottle C. And you have from the middle bottle, they go from 40% to 37, lose 3 percentage points, and they go to the bottle C. So you have only a shift from A to C and from B to C. That's what you expect from rational people. And using this, we can isolate and identify the behavioral effect in this case. So we've lost 19% of product A that moved to product B, and the most expensive bottle C also sort of loses some sales to the middle option. As a pricing manager, of course, we do like the people who move from A to B, not so much the people who move from C to B, but we accept them because, of course, the effect from A to B is much, much larger. And that helps us now understand how to actually work with these behavioral effects. And let me go into a bit more detail here. And let me show my other screen. I don't know if you tell me when you can see it.
Yep, it's there.
Perfect. So what I've done now here is in this tool, which is the Buynomics tool that Anton mentioned at the beginning, I have 3 wines here and what's happening after good, better, best. And so this one's a bit grayed out. So I would only show our shoppers here these 2 wines. They have costs for us so that we can compute profitability. And we have the prices, the 10 euros and the 30 euros. And what I do now is show them, won't go into detail, but the technology that we developed, the virtual shoppers that behave like real people. And the advantage of that is you can tell them to be rational or irrational in this case. And you see that we have the 40, 60% as we have on the slides. So 40% buy the good wine, 6% the other wine. And for example, if we now would, let's say, increase the price here by €1, we would lose some sales. They go to the better product. We lose some sales. People who will not buy any of the wines have price elasticity, everything we typically need for pricing decisions. But in this case, we're particularly interested in the behavioral effect. And let's say we now include the best wine, and we don't tell the virtual shoppers here to be rational. They will have the sales shares of the rational people, right? So they have the 37%, the 8%, and they have the 55% here. And if we now go back and say, okay, let's also consider this middle effect, the behavioral effect, then we get the desired effect of that we also saw in the experiment. Of course, in the experiment, real people, you cannot tell, okay, now act as if you're rational, now act as if you're irrational. They are what they are. But here we have the option to really separate it and see, okay, now we have the market shares that we desired, and let's compare them all side by side. We can also, so here, this is the 2-bottle example that we started with. We have here the 3-bottle, everyone's rational, and we have the 3-bottle behavioral effect. So when people act rational, and then we can, for example, when we look at revenue or profit, actually see how much more we can gain from this behavioral effect, and if it makes sense to work with such effects. And there are others that you can turn on and off. And this, to us, I think, is a way to better understand and actually work with these behavioral effects that goes beyond just the story of the 3 wine bottles that probably most know. Here is a way to actually make it usable and use it then for optimization. Of course, you can also combine it with different price points and see which offer then produces the best results. Let me go back to the presentation. And I'll see the PowerPoint again.
Yes.
Perfect. So that was just one example. And of course, there are many behavioral effects, and we just put together some of the most important ones. So we looked at the middle option. There are others. So for example, what's been used in like online offers quite a lot is that you say, you highlight one of the products, say best value for money, or most customers who are like you buy this product. And this also has a very consistent and measurable effect on what people actually will choose in their offer, and can be used to optimize the profitability, for example. Similar effects that are being used quite a lot, like price anchors, where you say, okay, this was $12.99, now it's $9.99. So all of these effects, I think most of us have seen. Many of them can And this is really, I think, the way to really work with these behavioral effects is not just saying that they exist, but to make them measurable and then usable together with different price points. So you can work with these behavioral effects also in combination with maybe not $40.99, but $50.99, $30.99 different price points, and really see how that optimizes, how that affects profitability or revenue, whatever is important in this situation. I think one important thing, and we already talked a bit about the replication crisis of behavioral effects and effect of the interesting stories about fraud in some of these publications. I think another effect that is, or phenomenon that's important for us as practitioners that's very relevant, is that we often see that there are differences between what we see in surveys and what then happens in reality. And of course, one of the reasons for that is that if you have a survey conjoint or something like that, Abo Granger, Van Westendorp, they are much more simplified versus what's the actual offer in the store, right? So if you ask someone just a simplified question, which one of these three phones would you buy? The answer can be very different from the real world case where people can choose from hundreds or thousands of different products. So these are all things that are important to remember. I think, last week we had a webinar with a guest on ecological effects, and one of the things we discussed was how to use pricing for we call it how to use pricing to save the planet, but essentially it was about pricing like CO2 consumptions and things like that. And always what you see in experiments is that there's strong discrepancy between what people say in a survey they will be willing to pay for something, for example, to reduce the carbon footprint of that product, versus what they're then actually willing to pay in the real decision when they can choose between different products. So these are things to know. And I think what's even more important is understand how to make it work in a specific situation. And I think to me always the example that captures this best is this one here. So this one is from a survey. We asked about shoppers in a survey about their willingness to pay for a chocolate bar. And I think the design was a Gabo Granger type question. So we asked them at different price points here, what's the probability, or would you buy this chocolate at 60 cents, 80 cents, and so on, up to 19.95 and then €1 and above. And what you always see when you cross a price threshold like this is that there's a large drop in the share of people who would buy the product once it crosses the price threshold. And that's typically somewhere in the range of maybe 20-30%, depends a bit on the context, but you always have a large drop in reported willingness to pay or reported sales in a survey. And then when you compare that same product with the reality and all the dots, what they show is our weekly sales by price. So there's a little bit of averaging across different stores here in place, but essentially what you see is that if you look very closely, you see that there's not this very strong price threshold. You don't see the strong price threshold in the data. If you look very closely, you see that there is a price threshold, but it's much smaller than the 20-30% drop here that comes from the survey. And this has I think that the main reason for that is, and that's also something that we validated across different contexts, is in the survey, people answer the question, should I buy this product, in this case, the chocolate snack, or should I buy nothing at all? So that's a very different question from the question people answer in the real world, where they're standing in front of a shelf and you have one product maybe at 99 cents and then at €1 or a little bit above €1. And the question, most of the people, their answer is not, do I buy this or nothing at all, but do I buy this or something else? And in the question, this or something else, the effect of that one product's price threshold is significantly decreased. So the more products you have as alternatives for a shopper, because there are more products in the shelf, the smaller something like a price threshold gets. And this is really important to understand, is that you cannot one-to-one just take the survey results with the huge price threshold and apply that in a situation where your products are compared to a long range of different alternatives, but you need to adapt it. And that's, for example, something we're also we have in the solution, where if you just share the product in isolation to a group of customers, you would see a large price threshold. If you show it together with different other products, the price threshold is reduced, and it's reduces with the number of alternatives that are available. So this is just to highlight, to actually work with many of these behavioral effects. They shouldn't be applied one-to-one, but they need to be put in the proper context of where they need to be applied. If there's only one product, price thresholds are huge. If one product together with many other products, price thresholds tend to get much larger, smaller. All right, so let me just summarize, and then I'll hand over to you, Anton, again. So what are the learnings? I think the first one, behavioral effects are real, so we're not rational, and this should be considered by pricing and revenue management professionals. But what is also important is that many of the results or findings cannot be taken one-to-one from the laboratory, where effects are studied in isolation and taken into the real world. Because in the real world, decision-making is very different. You don't look at a single product, but you often look at a large shelf of different products, and your decision-making there is not so much focused on the single product, but it's focused on different products and the alternatives there. Also, what we saw in the beginning with the replication crisis and this interesting case of fraud in the literature is that I think the more indirect effects should be taken with a grain of salt and are much more difficult to apply. Something that's very direct, like a price threshold, or having a product highlighted in a shelf, or if you have a good, better, best, and you highlight the one in the middle, that's much more direct, and the effect is much more reliable and strong than if you try to prime someone, as in the example where you need to, that we mentioned, where you need to argue against something you believe, then you feel dirty, and therefore you buy more cleansing products. And the real challenge for us, and this is what I think where we spend most of our time working, is the real challenge really is making it usable for pricing and RGM professionals. So not just essentially going from the simple narrative, the simple story, here's an interesting effect, the 2 or 3 wine bottles, but actually applying that effect for real decision makings. So that also means dissecting the pure behavioral effect from what else is going on in the market, and bring this all together into essentially one central decision model. Back to you, Anton. I hope the break in the beginning wasn't too big.
I would say it's almost forgotten already. Great, thanks a lot for all these insights. We're running a bit out of time, but there's actually 2 questions I would like to spend 1 or 2 minutes on. The first one is from Chris. Can we break out the effects of brand and the environment on elasticities? That is, how do we better predict customer demand when they are willing to pay more for a brand in certain times, such as buying a certain tennis racket after Wimbledon?
That's already very specific. So I understand the question correctly, is that you say that brands have sort of different willingness to pay over the year, right? So you play Wimbledon, and everyone wants the racket that the winner had. So the question is if that's, I would say happy to answer that afterwards, but my first reply would be that's not necessarily irrational, right? So if you think, or we have the same thing with running shoes now in the World Cup, where you have faster shoes, and if you see that the winner does a certain thing, I think it would even be rational to try to imitate that for a while. The irrational thing would be that, I mean, there's lots of attention on that case in that moment, And I don't know, once it probably goes away from people's awareness faster than it should if it works. But happy to answer that afterwards. That sounds like a very specific case in this example.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great. Maybe quickly on the second one, it's on how to manage the reputation impact when you run some of these tactics. So, for example, it's possible to nudge customers to short-term behavior. For example, the wine example you just showed. But how do we look at the long-term impact of something like that?
In the wine example.
Yeah, so the question is, it's possible to nudge customers to get some immediate benefit, but they will often see through this eventually and may have adverse long-term impact on the brand.
Well, this should, of course, always be considered. I mean, here we're just talking about initially about the effect. I would have to see the specific examples to say something about that. Of course, you cannot come across as dishonest or like pushing people to something that that they otherwise wouldn't do. I think the wine example is probably very innocent in this regard. So the only harm is people might spend more than some people spend more than they originally wanted to. But of course, the long-term effects need to be considered in this case.
Great, thanks. I know it was short, but to both of you, feel free to reach out and we will touch on answering them more in detail. All the other questions, we'll come back to those offline to you. Before we close, if we look on the next slide, there's a short overview I want to share. So it's a very exciting month we're entering at the moment. So there's a couple of next Buynomics talks lined up. Next week, we're going to have Danilo Zata with us. And after that, we're going to look at the RGM and pricing strategies. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I hope it was okay to overdo the time a bit. And yeah, we hope you have a great weekend and looking forward to see you in the next webinars as well.
Thank you also from my side. Sorry again for dropping out for a minute or so. Wish you all a happy weekend and hope to see you again next webinar. Next one, it's going to be a big one again. Yeah, looking forward to seeing you there. Bye.